The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of the small apartment, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Elena Martinez sat at the kitchen table, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since grown cold. The eviction notice lay before her, its bold red letters seeming to pulse with each passing second. 22 years old, with dark hair that caught the light like polished mahogany and eyes the color of warm amber, Elena had always been told she was beautiful. But beauty, she had learned, meant little when your family was drowning in debt and your father, as medical bills kept mounting higher each month. Her mother, Carmen, emerged from the bedroom where Elena's father lay sleeping. The chemotherapy had taken so much from him, his strength, his appetite, his hope. Carmen's face was etched with lines that hadn't been there a year ago, when life still held promise instead of desperation. "Mia," Carmen whispered, her voice barely audible. "We need to talk." Elena looked up from the notice, seeing something in her mother's eyes that made her stomach tighten with dread. "What is it, Mama?" Carmen sat down heavily in the chair across from her daughter. Her hands trembled as she placed a business card on the table between them. The card was simple, elegant cream-colored paper with embossed black lettering that read, "Alexander Blackwood, Private Acquisitions." "A man came by yesterday while you were at work," Carmen began, her voice thick with shame. He made us an offer." Elena picked up the card, feeling the expensive weight of the paper between her fingers. She had heard of Alexander Blackwood, of course, everyone had. He was the kind of man who appeared in Forbes magazines and business newspapers, calculating and impossibly wealthy. They called him the most ruthless businessman in America, a man who collected companies the way others collected stamps. "What kind of offer?" Elena asked, though something deep in her chest already knew the answer would change everything. Carmen's eyes filled with tears. "He knows about Papa's condition. He knows about the bills, the mortgage, everything. He said ... She paused, unable to meet her daughter's gaze. "He said he would pay off all our debts. The hospital bills, the house, everything. Enough to give Papa the treatment he needs at the private clinic in Boston." Elena's heart began to race. In exchange for what? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. When Carmen finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "He wants to marry you, Elena, a contract marriage. 1 year, he said ... He said he needs a wife for business purposes, something about an inheritance clause in his grandfather's will." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She stared at her mother, waiting for the punchline, the moment when this would all reveal itself as some cruel joke. But Carmen's tears were real, and the desperation in her eyes was unmistakable. "You can't be serious," Elena breathed. "The doctors say Papa has maybe 3 months without the new treatment," Carmen continued, her voice breaking. "With it, he could have years, maybe even beat this thing completely." Elena stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where she had grown up. The houses were small but well-maintained, filled with families who had built their lives here over generations. This place was home, but home was slipping away from them one bill at a time. What exactly would this ... contract involve? She asked, her back still turned to her mother. 1 year of marriage? You would live in his house, attend business functions as his wife. But he assured me that ... that the arrangement would be completely professional, separate bedrooms, no intimate expectations. Elena turned around slowly. "And you believe him?" Carmen's silence was answer enough. That evening, Elena found herself standing outside the towering glass building that housed Blackwood Industries. The October wind whipped through the downtown streets, cutting through her simple coat like ice. She had dressed carefully, her best black dress, the one she wore to job interviews, her grandmother's pearl earrings. If she was going to meet the man who wanted to buy her like a piece of property, she would do it with dignity. The elevator rose smoothly to the 42nd floor, carrying her toward a future she couldn't have imagined that morning. The doors opened to reveal a reception area that screamed money marble floors, abstract art that probably cost more than her family made in a year, and a view of the city that made her feel dizzy. "Miss Martinez?" A woman in an impeccable suit approached her. "Mr. Blackwood is waiting for you in his office." Elena followed her down a hallway lined with windows, each step echoing in the vast space. When they reached the office at the end, the woman knocked once and opened the door. Alexander Blackwood stood with his back to her, looking out at the city below. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that looked like it had been styled by someone who charged more per hour than Elena made in a week. When he turned around, she was struck by how different he looked from his photographs. The business magazines always showed him cold and calculating, but in person, there was something else, a weariness around his eyes that spoke of burdens she couldn't imagine. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle. "Thank you for coming." Elena remained standing near the door, her purse clutched tightly in her hands. "I want to hear the terms directly from you." He gestured toward a leather chair in front of his desk, but she didn't move. After a moment, he nodded in understanding. "Very well, the arrangement is simple. A marriage contract for 1 year. In exchange, I will pay all of your family's medical debts and provide enough additional funding to ensure your father receives the best possible care. You would live in my house, accompany me to business functions, and maintain the appearance of a married couple in public. And privately? Privately, we would live separate lives. You would have your own wing of the house, your own space. I would ask nothing of you beyond what is necessary to maintain appearances." Elena studied his face, looking for signs of deception. "Why me? You could marry anyone, someone from your own world." For the first time, something flickered across his features, vulnerability, perhaps, or pain. "Because someone from my world would have expectations? They would want things I cannot give. You, on the other hand, are doing this for reasons I understand. Love for your family, that's refreshing. You make it sound noble. But we both know what this really is." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "My grandfather S. will stipulates that I must be married by my 33rd birthday to inherit his foundation. That birthday is in 11 months. I've spent years building this company, but the foundation, it funds hospitals, research facilities, scholarships for underprivileged students. Thousands of people depend on that money." Elena felt something shift inside her chest. "So you're not doing this just for yourself. Neither are you." The truth of his words hung in the air between them. They were both trapped by circumstances beyond their control, both making sacrifices for people they loved. "I need time to think," Elena said finally. "Of course, but Miss Martinez—" He moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. "If you agree to this, I give you my word that you will be treated with respect, always." 2 weeks later, Elena stood in a small chapel wearing a simple white dress she had bought the day before. There were no guests, no flowers, no music, just a judge, 2 witnesses Alexander had arranged, and the strangest wedding ceremony she could have imagined. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander's kiss was brief and formal, his lips barely brushing hers. But as he pulled away, she saw something in his eyes that made her wonder if this arrangement might be more complicated than either of them had anticipated. The months that followed were unlike anything Elena had expected. Alexander's house was enormous, a sprawling estate in the hills outside the city, but it felt more like a museum than a home. She had her own wing, as promised, with a bedroom, sitting room, and private balcony that overlooked gardens she rarely saw anyone tend. Their public appearances were carefully choreographed affairs. Alexander would place his hand on the small of her back as they entered charity galas, lean close to whisper in her ear during business dinners, smile at her with what looked like genuine affection. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, the powerful businessman and his beautiful young wife. But in private, they were strangers sharing a house. Elena's father's health improved dramatically with the new treatment. The relief in her mother's voice during their weekly phone calls was worth every awkward moment, every sleepless night in her too large bedroom. Every morning when she woke up and remembered that her life had become something she barely recognized. It was during the 6th month of their marriage that everything changed. Elena had been walking through the gardens late one evening, unable to sleep, when she heard music coming from the main house. Following the sound, she discovered Alexander in what she had assumed was a formal dining room but was actually a music room, complete with a grand piano. He was playing something hauntingly beautiful, his fingers moving across the keys with a skill that spoke of years of training. His usual controlled expression was gone, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. When the piece ended, he sat in silence for a moment before noticing her in the doorway. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude." "It's your house too," he replied, though there was surprise in his voice. "I didn't think anyone else was awake." Elena stepped into the room, drawn by the lingering echoes of the music. "That was beautiful." "I didn't know you played." "My grandmother taught me. She said music was the only thing that couldn't be bought or sold, only given freely." He looked down at the keys. "I haven't played for anyone in years." Something in his voice made her move closer. "Why not?" "Because the people in my life are generally interested in things that can make them money." Elena sat down on the bench beside him, careful to maintain distance between them. "Play something else?" He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read, then placed his hands on the keys again. This time the music was softer, more intimate, a lullaby, perhaps, or a love song. As he played, Elena found herself studying his profile, noticing things she had missed before. The way his shoulders relaxed when he was focused on something other than business, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the fact that his hands, which signed million-dollar deals without hesitation, trembled slightly when they created something beautiful. When the music stopped, they sat in comfortable silence for the first time since their wedding day. "Thank you," Elena said softly. "For what?" "For showing me who you really are." Alexander turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw not the cold businessman the world feared, but a man who was just as lonely as she was. The last months of their contract passed differently. They still maintained separate lives. But there were small changes: shared breakfasts on Sunday mornings, conversations that went beyond the weather or upcoming events, moments when their carefully maintained distance seemed less necessary. When the year ended and Alexander's 33rd birthday had passed, ensuring his inheritance, they sat in his office once again to discuss the dissolution of their marriage. The papers were already drawn up, the financial arrangements finalized. Elena's family was secure, and Alexander had what he needed from his grandfather's will. "So this is it," Elena said, looking at the divorce papers. "Unless ... double quotes," Alexander began, then stopped himself. "Unless what?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Unless we wanted to try something real." Elena's heart stopped. Alexander ... I know this wasn't what either of us planned. I know I have no right to ask, but this year, you've made this house feel like a home. You've made me remember what it feels like to be human instead of just a business machine." Elena looked down at the papers, then back at the man who had been her husband in name only, but who had somehow become so much more. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you, Elena. I'm saying that what started as a contract has become the most real thing in my life. I'm asking if you might consider staying, not because of any agreement or obligation, but because you want to." Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. Somewhere in the past year, she had fallen in love, too, not with the feared billionaire, but with the man who played piano in empty rooms and worried about the people who depended on his foundation. The man who had kept every promise he had made to her, who had treated her with kindness when he could have demanded anything. Instead of answering with words, she reached across the desk and tore the divorce papers in half. Alexander's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "So," Elena said, moving around the desk to stand beside his chair, "if we're going to do this for real, I think we should start with a proper first date." "I'd like that," Alexander replied, standing to face her. "Though I should warn you, I'm a little out of practice." "That's okay," Elena said, reaching up to touch his face. "We have all the time in the world to figure it out." When he kissed her this time, it wasn't the formal press of lips from their wedding day. It was soft and tentative and full of possibility, the first kiss of their real beginning. Not the ending of a contract, but the start of something that could never be bought or sold, only given freely. Outside the office windows, the city sparkled in the fading light, full of its own stories of love found in unexpected places. And in a house in the hills that had finally become a home, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances began to write their own love story, one that belonged entirely to them,